Are you over the grind of the Blink Blade or the Drifter? You gotta walk up to an enemy, hit them in the face, they probably hit you back. Couldn't someone else do all the heavy lifting? Well, do I have the class for you? The Boneshaper lets you live out your middle management dreams. Raise an army of the dead to do the dirty work, and you sit back and collect all the profits. Relax, collect loot, collect experience. Throw out the occasional curse or maybe a poison, and let your undead army take out the trash. Let me show you how to maximize profits with the Boneshaper right after this. I've always enjoyed horror and monsters and that whole aesthetic. When I was a kid, I remember finding the ghost section in the library and really enjoying all that stuff. I mean, the first real big novel I read was Pet Sematary by Stephen King when I was 10. It scared the ever-living crap out of me. So when my group was going to start playing Frosthaven, I immediately gravitated towards the Boneshaper. I loved the idea of a necromancer-based summoning class, and I wanted to try it out. Now, I was one of the two more experienced people in our group, so I let everyone else pick first and I picked last. And sadly, someone else decided to go with the Boneshaper before I had a chance to claim it. Well, a couple retirements later, and she was available again. So I decided this was the time for me to get acquainted with this class. The key component of the Boneshaper is summoning, of course. Like we already mentioned, you are summoning an army of the dead after all. The tweak here is something that's relatively new, I think completely new to Frosthaven, and that's the idea of a summon that isn't lost when you play it out. Normally summons in Gloomhaven and Jaws of the Lion were cards that you played out once, and once they died, that was it. They were gone, the card was gone, everything. That is not always the case in Frosthaven. The Banner Spear has some non-lost summons that you can repeatedly put out. The Boneshaper has them as well. And the key kind of summon around the Boneshaper is called the Shambling Skeleton. We'll get to those cards in a minute to get into more detail about them, but essentially they're completely disposable summons. They're low health, they do a little bit of damage, they move a little bit, but you can summon them a lot and summon many of them at the same time. The key component, again, is that you don't lose them when they die. When they die, the card goes back in your discard pile just like a regular card, and you can get it back in your hand and resummon another skeleton later. It's a pretty cool mechanic. The other important note here about the way that the Boneshaper works is that a lot of these abilities, including summoning those skeletons that I just mentioned, come at the cost of health to your character. So each one of those skeletons that you can summon at level 1 costs you 2 health to bring out. And if you're looking at the character card hit point area, you'll notice that you start out with a whole 6 hit points. So you can quickly find yourself in dire straits if you just summon and summon and summon. You can't do that. The other thing is there are other abilities that also use health in some cases in order to give you bonus effects or heals or other things like that. So watch out for those later as we get to all the different cards. The last thing I want to mention about the front here is that you do have a 12-card hand, which is pretty solid, especially since as the Boneshaper, you're going to have a lot of cards that sit out in front of you for periods of time. So 12 might seem like a lot, but if you have 3 or 4 summons sitting in front of you, it's a much smaller hand size that you're dealing with. Still, I've always felt good with the amount of cards that I had available to me. The back of the card here lists a complexity of 4, which I think is accurate for the Boneshaper. The main difficulty in playing the Boneshaper is understanding how your summons are going to work. You're so reliant on them for your damage. They're basically doing almost all of your damage. I mean, you have some damaging attacks, but for the most part, it's all about your summons. And the way that summons work, if you haven't played one of these classes in Gloomhaven before, is that they just use the monster AI to determine where they move, who they attack, and all that stuff. You don't have direct control over them. Now, you do have cards that temporarily grant you control for a turn. Maybe they'll let you move it, or maybe they'll let you move and attack with it. Some other things like that. We'll see more on that later. But for the most part, it's just relying on that monster AI. So to get the most out of this class, you really have to understand how it's going to work. What are your summons going to do each turn? Who are they going to go after? What's the path that they're going to take? Do they have enough movement to get there? There's all kinds of things that you have to consider. In a lot of cases, you're dealing with 2, 3, maybe 4 or more summons even. So it can make it more and more difficult the more that you have out there. The other thing you'll see here are the elemental affinities. The Boneshaper generates a lot of earth and a lot of darkness, and also uses both those elements quite a bit to add bonuses to their different abilities. Doing that is also frequently a good way to generate XP with this class, which is nice. So really, try to keep track of those things and use them whenever they're available. Now, before we move into all the different ability cards that are available to you, let's talk really briefly about builds. I'm not going to get into all the details right now. We'll talk about that as we look at cards, especially the level up cards. But in reality, there's kind of two main paths that you can choose for the Boneshaper. Now, there are different flavors within each one of those paths a little bit, but really there's two main ways you can go. You can either focus on those disposable summons that I mentioned a minute ago, where like the low health skeletons and just summon a lot of them and summon them repeatedly, and just kind of always have this big army of the dead working for you. But the other build path that you can choose is to focus on bigger summons that you get later as you level up. Initially, you don't have these summons available to you to do that big bad single summon build, but you will get one at level 2 that you can start working on that at that point. And in that build, it's less about volume and more about keeping that one big summon alive so that they can continue doing damage the entire time. So with that, let's get to the cards. We're going to talk about these first three all at the same time. If you look, you'll see that the tops of each one of these cards is exactly the same. These are three different cards that allow you to summon those shambling skeletons we talked about earlier, the non-lost summons. Each one of these guys has 3 health, they move 2 and they attack 2. It costs 2 of your health to summon each one, and you do gain an experience from it. You'll notice their initiatives are 91, 81, and 71, and their bottoms are also different. The bottom of life and death is the bottom that I like the least out of these, just because it's a lost bottom. So if I use that bottom, I'm going to be short of a skeleton summoning card in the future. So with this one, you get to negate the next 3 sources of damage to you, which is, pretty nice, but I just don't want to sacrifice one of my skeleton summons in most cases. Now, the bottom on Return Servant is really useful. It's a move 4, and we all know how useful movement can be. Although I will say with the Boneshaper, you spend a lot of time kind of not moving as much, which means that this move 4 isn't maybe as valuable as it is to other classes. But there are times you need to move, and this is a good card to keep around for that very purpose. And the bottom of Damned Horde is the first instance we see of your cursing ability. You do have quite a few different cards that allow you to apply curses to enemies, which is useful as a Boneshaper or as anybody. I mean, it helps the whole party. And in this case, you're able to curse 2 enemies within range 2. Pretty decent bottom and useful. Now for these 3 cards, I'm most likely to keep Return Servant for that movement bottom in case I need it, and use the other 2 for summons, at least in most cases. Our next card here is Transfer of Essence. This one is an initiative of 62, and if you remember our first 3 cards, it was 91, 81, and 71. One thing about the Boneshaper is expect to go late quite often, but in my estimation, it's usually very useful to be able to do that as a summoning class. You do have some higher initiatives that we'll see a little bit later, but not super high like other classes have. You're going to spend a lot of time going late in the rounds, which is usually fine with me. So Transfer of Essence, you get to strengthen one ally within range 3, and you can also get to poison one enemy within range 3 at the same time. If you have Darkness and or Earth available, you can use those to increase the number of targets on each of those abilities. If you burn Darkness, you get to target 2 allies with the Strengthen ability, and if you can burn Earth, you get to target 2 enemies with the Poison ability and also gain an experience. This is really a fun card. I like to have this one. I'm still using it quite a bit, even though I'm about level 6 right now, and I expect to use it for a long time. It's nice to be able to both strengthen and poison, do good and bad at the same time. I like that a lot. The bottom of this card is also very important, especially if you're playing the single big bad summon build. That's your main healing way right here. You get to do a heal 5 within range 3 of one ally. So you can't heal yourself with this. You can only heal others with it. It can be one of your party members or one of your summons. But the key here is that you also have to take 2 damage to dish out this 5 healing. At the same time, you also generate darkness with this card. This is definitely important to have around. It's not really helpful for those skeletons that only have 3 health. You're not going to want to take 2 health to heal up a skeleton for 2 or something, right? But when you do have a bigger summon that you're trying to keep alive, this one can be critical to have around. Next up here we have Decaying Will. It's an attack 1, range 5 with poison. If one of your summons is next to the target, it makes an attack 2, range 5 with poison, and it also generates earth. It's an initiative of 46, which is nothing to write home about, but it does have a very useful bottom. You know how we talked earlier about how the fact that you can't really control your summons, at least not all the time. So they will run up and attack enemies that have high retaliate values no matter what. They don't care. They don't think about that. They won't walk into traps. They won't walk into hazardous terrain or things like that. But if someone has retaliate, they don't care. They attack them. So this card, when you play it out, it's a scenario effect where all your summons are now immune to retaliate damage, which can be really nice in some scenarios. This is a good one to make sure you check at the beginning of the scenario. If there are a lot of enemies with retaliate, remember to bring this card with you for sure. Now we have Dark Tidings. This allows you to grant 3 of your summons an attack +0 with curse. Now these summons can be anywhere on the board in range of any enemy and they will all attack. Now this counts for ranged summons and melee summons, although most of your summons are melee. So they have to be in the right position already because it doesn't grant any movement. So if they're out in the middle of nowhere, they're not going to be able to attack. If you can burn darkness, you also get to add poison to that attack and gain an additional experience. Now it is a lost card, so you do get an experience for that. So you get to up to 2 experience from this card. But again, you're going to lose it when you use it. So make sure you get the most value out of it you can. As an initiative of 43, which again is a pretty lame, middle-of-the-road kind of initiative, but it does give you a move 4 on the bottom, which, you know, those are often useful. Now we have Angry Spirits in our first traditional lost summon. This summons a Wraith that has 1 health, it moves 2, it has an attack of 1, yes, just 1, an attack of 1, but at a range of 3. It's also flying and has 2 shields, so even though it only has 1 health, it can be somewhat durable because of those shields, and it also generates a darkness when you put it out. You do get 2 experience for this because you do lose the summon if it does die. This is not the summon that you build that big bad summon build around. You really won't get that till level 2, which we'll get to later in this video, but it is a pretty decent summon. You can definitely keep her alive for a while if you put her in the right place, and she can stay back. She's flying, she has those shields, and she can just kind of plink away at the enemies, which can be good. The bottom action is actually pretty decent too. This is definitely good if you have a bunch of skeletons on the board and you know one of them is potentially going to die. With this bottom action, the next time one of your summons dies from attack damage, the attacker suffers 2 damage. Which can be, you know, pretty useful. If you know your, disposable skeleton is about to die anyways, you might as well put this card out. Fell Remedy is a very important healing card both for you, the summoner, and for your allies or summons. This one is particularly important if you do that big bad summon build, which again, we'll talk more about later when we get to level 2. It starts out as a base heal 2 at range 3, targeting 1 ally. So that's an ally, that means you can't use it on yourself. If you have Earth available, you can burn that for an additional 2 healing. If you have Darkness available, you can also burn that for another additional 2 healing and an experience point. You don't have to use both, you can do one or the other, but if you use both, then it turns into a 6 heal with an experience, which is a pretty decent top action for sure, with no detrimental effects, like you don't have to sacrifice your own healing or anything like that. You just have to have 2 elements to be able to burn. It is a 30 initiative, which is honestly one of your best initiatives. It's sad but true, that's one of your best initiatives. So it can help you out if you need to try to go sooner in a turn for one reason or another. And then the bottom action is a heal that is basically meant for you expressly. At its base, it's just to heal oneself. But if an enemy dies during the round that you play this, you get an additional heal oneself after that. It's important that they're split up because if you have poison, then you can heal 1 to remove the poison and then do another heal 1 to actually get 1 healing out of this. It's pretty useful. I mean, I know 1 healing or even 2 healing total doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have 6 hit points and you're using your health the way that you do as a Boneshaper, this can be really useful, so don't underestimate this card. Okay, we made it here. This is your best initiative at 18. Kind of sad, but this is your best initiative. This is Flow of the Black River. The top action is fairly simple. It's a heal of X + 1 for just you, just your summoner, where X is the number of summons that you have active. If you only have one summon out, then this is a 2 heal. If you had 3 summons out, this is a 4 heal. You get the picture. Pretty decent heal, especially if you have a few summons out on the board. The bottom action is a move 2, and then you get to grant one of your summons a move 2. You have to keep in mind that your summons always go before you in initiative. Whatever your initiative is, like in this case, your initiative is an 18, your summons actually do their move and attacks just before you get to go. So don't play this card thinking you're going to be able to grant them a 2 movement, which will get them into position to perform an attack. You won't. They will have already done their regular attack. However, if you couple this with a different top that grants them just an attack, it can be useful. Still a good card overall, just because that initiative and the healing is nice too. Here we have one of my favorite cards in the class, and that's Command the Wretched, mostly because of this top action. With this top action, you get to grant one of your summons a move +0 and attack +0. If darkness is available, you can burn that darkness to also give that attack a Pierce 2. This is what I was talking about earlier, where there are some cards that allow you to fully control your summon. In this case, you can finally get them to move to the right place and attack exactly who you want them to attack. So I use this as often as I possibly can when I'm playing my Boneshaper. It's an 83 initiative, which again is a typically late Boneshaper initiative, but that kind of doesn't matter in most respects. The bottom action is another loss. This is a grant 1 ally and attack 5. I've only used this a few times. You know, it's just one of those end of the scenario kind of things. And I just haven't often felt the need to be able to use it, but to be able to grant somebody an attack 5 with a level 1 card is pretty cool. You do gain 1 experience, but again, it is a burn to do that. Here with Eternal Torment, we have another source of curse. In this case, it's a curse at range 5. In addition to that curse, if you have a summon next to the target of the curse, you get to grant them an attack +0 and generate darkness. So altogether, a very good top action doing a few different things that are good for you all at once. The bottom action is a loot 1 for one of your summons, which is cool. So often with the Boneshaper, you're kind of in the back, you're out of the way, you're not always in the best location to be able to loot. But in this case, you get to give your summon that ability at least once in a while. Our next card here is Malicious Conversion. Just because it's really simpler to describe, I'm going to start with the bottom. It's a move 3, and if you burn Earth, it turns into a move 5. Pretty simple, right? It is also a very high initiative for the Boneshaper. Not high initiative for other classes, but for the Boneshaper, 26 is pretty good. And the top is a pretty complicated loss, but it does some cool things. For starters, it's an attack 4, but this is not an attack 4 for one of your summons. This is an attack 4 for your Boneshaper, a melee attack, which is really unusual because I'm usually not around to do a melee attack with my Boneshaper, but you know, that's how I play it. Now, if that attack 4 kills the target, you basically get to search your discard pile for one of your summons and immediately play that summon and reduce any damage you might have taken from summoning that creature by 2. So if you have one of your shambling skeletons in your discard pile, which with 3 of them in your opening hand as a level 1 Boneshaper is pretty likely, then you get to basically put that one out for free without taking any health for it either. That's pretty cool. You do also generate Earth and Darkness with this card, but you also get an experience, and again, it's a loss. So there's a lot going on here. And I have to say, one of the things that I like most about this card is like the role-playing sort of aspects of it. So basically what happens is that you attack and kill an enemy, and if you do kill him, you basically turn him into one of your skeletons. That's the way I read it, which is pretty darn cool if you ask me. Now we're finally getting into our X cards for the Boneshaper. First one here, Approach Oblivion. This is another heal card, but a really souped up heal card. This is a heal 4 targeting all allies within range 2, so all allies. That includes people in your party, that includes any summons that are within range 2 of you, and you also give all of them a bless. So that can be a lot if everything is set up the right way. You have to take 2 damage for that and a curse for that, and it's a burn, but you do also get 2 experience. So a lot going on the top half of this card for sure. It's a 53 initiative, very middle of the road, whatever. The bottom is grant one of your summons a move 3. Like I mentioned before about granting your summons movements, it's not to set them up for an attack that round, it's just to put them in the right place where you need them for the next round, really, and when you're doing that. And you also generate wind. Why you generate wind, I have no idea. If I do have a complaint about some of the way that some cards in Frosthaven are set up, it's with the elements that they generate sometimes. The elements that they generate just don't always make sense in the context of the class, at least to me. Our second X card here is Exploding Corpse, and that's a great name for this card because that's basically exactly what happens. In this case, you pick one of your summons and you spontaneously force them to explode. And in exploding, they get to perform an attack 4 targeting all adjacent enemies. So if you have one of your disposable skeletons that's completely surrounded, you can do a lot of damage with this card potentially. It is of course a loss for that effect, and it does also kill the summon since you forced it to explode. And lastly, it gives you some fire. Which kind of like the last card, it's like, why are you generating fire? I don't know. I guess because it was an explosion. I suppose for like sort of role-playing reasons, maybe it makes sense. But in the context of your class and what elements it uses and doesn't use, fire is pretty useless. You get 1 experience out of it, and again, it is a lost card. The bottom action is a similar thing where the next enemy that dies also then explodes and does 2 damage to any enemies or allies that are adjacent to it when it dies. And lastly, this is one of those pretty high initiatives for the Boneshaper, but honestly, I've never brought this card with me. You never want to take your big bad summon and force it to explode, no matter how much damage it's going to do. And we get to our final level 1 card, our final X card here, Wrath of the Turned Earth. This is one that I brought with me all the time. I love any of these cards that get to grant your summons extra attacks in some way. In this case, you get to grant all of your summons an attack +1. Keep in mind they have to be in a position to do an attack +1. It doesn't grant any movement. If there's earth available, you can also burn that earth to add poison to that attack and add an experience to that attack. Very good top action. It's an 80 initiative, but who cares at this point? We're used to this stuff. The bottom is a good way to prevent damage to one of your summons. So for the next 3 sources of damage to one of your summons, you get to negate that damage with this card. It is a burn card, but can be very useful if you're in the last room, like a boss room maybe, or if you're in a situation where your big summon just got into a bad location and is surrounded by enemies or something like that. Definitely something that can be useful from time to time. Okay, with all the level 1 cards out of the way, let's take a look at my level 1 build. I have to note here that I didn't have to start at level 1. Like I mentioned in the intro of this video, I had already retired 2 characters, so you know we are higher prosperity. I actually started at level 2 and then got up to level 3 almost immediately because we went up to the next prosperity level after like my second scenario with this character. So I didn't have to languish at level 1 very long with this character. So this is just an example of what my level 1 build would be because I was never level 1. I was level 2 from the very start. But in this case, I'm bringing all the summons, of course. You're a summoning class. You need to bring your summons with you, no doubt. And then if you look at the second row here, I have 3 different healing cards available to me, along with that 18 initiative, of course. I also have the grant movement and attack card. I really like that one. I use that one quite often. Now if we go to the bottom row, Dark Tidings is the first card I would cut down here for sure. It's more for the skeleton army build, which I didn't really do. I do like the next card here, Decaying Will, because of that bottom to ignore retaliate can be super useful. I like bringing that loot 1 card with me, of course, that makes a lot of sense. And lastly, the card I care most about on this bottom row is Wrath of the Turned Earth, because it's another way to grant one of your summons an attack, which I love to be able to do that. I like to give them as many attacks as I can possibly give them. Okay, now let's get into level up cards, and here is where builds really come into play. In a lot of cases, it's going to diverge on which card that you actually choose, and you're going to have to choose carefully depending on the build that you're going for. So in this case, we have 2 different cards, Bone Dagger and Unearthed Horror. Bone Dagger is the card you want to take if you're going for that skeleton army build, where you just want to keep churning out those disposable skeletons one after the other and rely on them to do most of your damage. So let's look at that card more specifically. The top is an attack 4 with Curse, but you get to add +1 to that attack for every summon that you have out on the board. With the skeleton army, you can have 4 summons out, maybe 5 summons out, later maybe even more than that. So this could be a really big attack, though it is a burn, so it makes sense. I mean, if you do an attack 8, you expect that to be a burn card. It does also generate darkness and give you an experience. The initiative is decent for Boneshaper. 29 is actually pretty good for the Boneshaper. And the bottom of the card, though, that's where it really fulfills the needs of the Skeleton Army build. This is similar to Malicious Conversion, but in this case, it's a little bit different. So you're going to do a Curse range 2. If you burn Darkness, you can add 2 range to that to make it a Curse range 4. So if that enemy dies that round, it has to be that round, then you get to do a summon basically for free out of your discard pile like before. You get to take out one of your Shambling Skeleton cards, bring it out, and reduce the damage you suffer by 2. So basically get one out for free, which is nice. Now it does say reduce damage by 2. That is important because later on you're going to have other summons that could potentially cost even more to get out. You just don't quite have them yet. So that's Bone Dagger. Now on the total other side of the ledger is our big bad summon build, and it finally comes out at level 2. Unearthed Horror summons a Raging Corpse, which has 6 health, moves 2, and attacks 3. I mean, I know that doesn't sound that much better than a skeleton, but it does make a pretty big difference. The 6 health makes it so that you can keep it alive much easier. The 3 damage is only 1 more damage than the 2 damage that a skeleton does, but it makes a pretty big difference, especially if you're controlling that summon and making it attack multiple times. So this is a very good top card. You also generate Earth with this. You get 2 experience, but it is a lost summon. This is not disposable. You don't get to bring him back out. So you got to keep him alive, and that's how you focus on him for that big bad summon build. The bottom action is a poison all within range 1 from one of your summons. I've never used the bottom of this card. I mean, I use it for the summon, and I basically get that thing out at the very beginning. There's also a mastery around that you'll probably want to do, and we can get to that a little bit later. So I've never used the bottom. It's a good summon initiative because it's 94, so you get to go really late, make sure that he doesn't take any, cheap hits in the first round. As we move on to our level 3 cards, I'll mention one other thing about builds and the Boneshaper. There's not always a clear choice. I mean, I think that's true for a lot of classes, and you can kind of see that here at level 3. I think there is a clear choice if you're playing the Skeleton Army build. I do not believe there's a clear choice if you're playing the big bad summon build. So let's talk about Putrid Cloud here first. Putrid Cloud, you get to designate a summon, and it performs an attack 2 with poison against all adjacent enemies. You also have to kill that summon, and it generates Earth. This is very similar to Exploding Corpse from earlier, but it's not a burn, and you gain an experience. So you can do this repeatedly, and since you're likely doing it with your disposable skeletons in like a Skeleton Army build, it can be something that could be really useful throughout your campaign with the Boneshaper. It's a 28 initiative, which is okay. But the bottom is the really interesting part about Putrid Cloud. There's actually a build based around this. What the bottom does is when you put this out, it's a scenario effect. And for the rest of the scenario, you and the rest of your summons, anytime they are attacked, they give that enemy poison. If that enemy is already poisoned and they get attacked, then that enemy suffers 1 damage. So it's kind of like a built-in retaliate, but a little bit better than a retaliate because they don't have to survive for the enemy to take that damage. So this can churn out quite a bit of damage if you have a lot of skeletons out and they're often getting attacked. It also helps the rest of your party too. So this is a pretty solid card and a very interesting choice. On the other side, we have Grave Digging, which if you look at it, just glance at it, it just looks like another Shambling Skeleton, and it really is. The only difference here is the amount of health that you have to take. You only need to take 1 health to summon this particular Shambling Skeleton, which is pretty good when you're a Boneshaper, because even though you're level 3 at this point, you still only have 8 hit points base. So anywhere you can save hit points is a good thing. So the bottom of Grave Digging is interesting too. This is basically a bottom action that will allow you to summon, which summoning is usually a top action. So if you want to be able to, for instance, do a move and attack top action, but you also want to be able to summon, you can do that. So in that case, if you use the bottom of this, use it to summon one of your Shambling Skeletons, you can actually make that thing move and attack even on the turn that it was just summoned, which is unusual and can be pretty cool. You do have to take an extra damage to do that, but it also generates a Earth. And it is something also that's not a burn, so you get to keep it around for a long time. So which one of these cards do you take? I think both cards are really good for that Skeleton Army build. If you want to have fun with that Putrid Cloud thing, obviously that has a unique mechanic and you want to take that one. As far as the big summon, I don't think either one of these is really particularly beneficial to the big summon build. You could use Putrid Cloud with big summon, but I actually chose grave digging when I got to level 3. Having a shambling skeleton that I could get out for only 1 health I thought was really beneficial. I do, even though I'm playing a big summon build, that doesn't mean it's the only summon that I ever use. I do put out skeletons, just not with the same frequency as a skeleton army build. So for the big summon, I think I would take grave digging. I think for skeleton army, I might actually take Putrid Cloud, just because I think that bottom is pretty fun. And level 4 is another choice where I don't think that there's a defined choice for the skeleton army versus the big bad summon build. So first we have critical failure. Here you get to grant one of your summons an attack +1. Again, remember with an attack like this, they have to be in position already. If you burn darkness, you get to grant 2 of your summons attack +1, which if you're playing skeleton army, I guess that could be pretty beneficial because you often have your skeletons surrounding a target. So if you do happen to have your skeleton surrounding a target and you have dark available, you can have both of them do an attack +1, which makes it a base attack 3. Pretty hot, definitely. 95 initiative, so super late Boneshaper initiative. Usually these high ones are reserved for summons, so I'm kind of surprised that this one is this low of a number, or this high of a number, however you want to look at it. The bottom is really weird, and it didn't really work for my big bad summon build at all, so I didn't pay as much attention to it, but I'm going to try to get into it a little bit right here. So what happens here, this is a scenario effect, gives you 2 experience. It's a burn, but it's for the whole scenario. And if a curse causes an enemy to cause no damage, then all of your summons adjacent to that enemy get to attack it. I think it seems like pretty cool if it does happen when it happens. Like if you happen to have 3 summons surrounding a guy and he drew a curse and they all attack him immediately, just dogpile him. That sounds pretty cool. That sounds fun, but I just don't know how often it would have happened with the build that I was going for. I would say that there are quite a few different ways to put out curse with Boneshaper, and if you focused on those things and use this card specifically, I guess you could probably do a sort of skeleton army curse build around this, and that could be some fun. So I don't know, maybe I'll give it a try someday. Now I'll tell you right away here, I took Flesh Shield mostly because it has a 16 initiative and I wanted to have some more high initiatives. Because there are times with my big bad summon build where I really wanted him to go early and potentially take something off the map. So in this case, you get to grant 1 ally within range 3 a shield 1 and retaliate 1. If you have earth to burn, you make that a shield 2. If you have dark to burn, you make that a retaliate 2 and gain an experience. It is not a burn. It's a pretty decent top action. It can be really useful with that big bad summon too, because if he's in a dicey situation and I can give him a shield 2, retaliate 2, and he's about to get attacked 2 times, maybe 3 times, that could be really beneficial for him. So that's one of the reasons I took this beyond the initiative. The bottom is also pretty useful for saving your summon in some cases as well. If you know that you're potentially going to take a big attack, one of your summons is going to potentially take a big attack, the bottom of this can get you out of trouble. You have to take 2 damage, but then the next time one of your summons takes any damage, that damage is basically nullified. I definitely use this quite a bit in the solo scenario. I won't get into that here, but I did do the solo scenario, and this was key in me succeeding in that particular scenario for the Boneshaper. So I went with Flesh Shield, like I said. I definitely think that if you're doing a skeleton army type build, you probably go with critical failure because it has multiple effects that it can do. And also, like, giving a single skeleton a shield 1, retaliate 1 isn't fantastic. And since you're dealing with disposable skeletons in the skeleton army build, like, nullifying damage is not that great either, especially if you have to take 2 damage yourself to do so. So I think you definitely take critical failure if you're doing some sort of skeleton army build and maybe turn that into a skeleton army curse build. But if you're doing single summon, I would definitely go with Flesh Shield here. So in some of the previous levels, it's a little iffy which way you could go depending on which build you're playing, but that is not the case at level 5. At level 5, if you are any kind of skeleton army type build, whether that's based on that curse thing we just talked about or Putrid Cloud or whatever, you definitely take Solid Bones. So we'll start with Solid Bones. Solid Bones, the top is a scenario effect, and if you're playing the skeleton army build, this is a thing you put out probably on turn 2. I mean, turn 1, you're usually summoning a skeleton right away, so, it's questionable. You're doing it very early because you want this out. This gives all your shambling skeletons an additional health, an additional move, and Pierce 1. It also gives you 2 experience, but again, it's a loss that you have for the entire scenario. So that gives your skeletons 4 health, 3 move, and attack 2 with Pierce 1. That is really useful for your skeletons. One of the big detriments to the skeleton army build is if enemies have a lot of armor, it can be hard to get through because you're doing a base attack too. That's even true for the big summon build. It can be hard to get through because you're only doing an attack 3, which is a little bit better. But one thing I would add to that right now, we'll talk about it more later when we get to perks. The Boneshaper attack modifier deck can be really solid once you spend a few perks on it. You get to get rid of a lot of your negatives, almost all your negatives, and throw in some cool positive effects that come out of there. So you can work around it, but it's definitely helpful to give them just a little bit of pierce for those shielded enemies, especially if they only have shield 1, of course. The bottom of this, you're probably going to use very rarely. It's a move 4, it generates earth. Because if you're using this card, you're putting it out very early in the scenario because you want that extra health and move and all that stuff. On the other side, if you're a big bad summon, you take the new big bad summon. So the new big bad summon has 8 health now. It has the same movement of 2, the same attack of 3, but now all of its attacks cause wound as well. That's a pretty big upgrade, and interestingly, both the cards at level 5 give you some way to deal with shielded enemies. On one side for the skeleton armor, you get the pierce for your skeletons. On the other side for big bad summon, you get a summon that's going to at least apply a wound, even if it does no other damage. With this big bad summon, lost summon, this is the first lost summon where you also have to take 2 damage to get him out, but in all likelihood you're doing that right at the beginning of the scenario, so hopefully it won't cause you too much trouble. It's a 98 initiative, almost as late as you can possibly go, just ahead of people long resting, but again, you're going to do that in the first round anyways if you're playing the big bad summon. And the bottom I have never played. I definitely took this card with my big bad summon build. I've never played the bottom. I don't know if I ever will. It's a 3 health with range 2. If you burn earth, you get to add 1 health and additional range to it. But honestly, if you're taking this for big bad summon, who cares what the bottom does, right? You're never going to use it. Now on to level 6. First we have Twisted Decree. This allows you to grant one of your summons a move +1, attack +1. So that's pretty solid, especially if you're using the big bad summon build, and spoiler alert, I would probably take this card for the big bad summon build. It also generates a darkness, which is useful. 85 initiative, really late, but not important. You can use another initiative card if you want to go early. As far as the bottom goes, it's an attack 1, range 4, but you get to add poison and curse, and it's not a burn. Another source of curse. I don't know if it's totally compatible with that curse skeleton army build idea, just because I probably take this more often with the big bad summon build, and if I'm doing the skeleton army build, I'm going to take the other card. Let's go to the other card. Rotting Multitude. I mentioned earlier that there are summons that will cost you more than 2 health. This one costs you 6 health, but allows you to put out 2 shambling skeletons at the same time. Again, it's not a burn card, so you can do it repeatedly. So you get to put out 2 shambling skeletons, you get an experience out of it, and you get to do it, again later if those 2 guys die. The bottom of it is a little weird. You can burn darkness to give yourself a move 4 and an experience, but if you don't burn darkness, you just grant one of your summons a move 4. But I think that if you're taking this card, you're taking it for the skeleton army build, so you're only really concerned about the top anyways, as is in the case with a lot of these cards. So big bad summon, definitely take Twisted Decree. If you're doing any sort of skeleton army variant, definitely take Rotting Multitudes. So I haven't talked about this yet, but one of the things I really like about Frosthaven and their ability cards is how they tie in thematic elements to them. It could be very easy to just be like, okay, you're a summoning class, and this card summons and it does this, and just have it really bland and vanilla. But I feel like they really took the time to really make the titles interesting. I love some of these titles, like Soul Claim in this case, and Recycled Limbs. Like, that really works for Boneshaper. And I do like how that ties into what you're actually doing. It actually feels like it makes sense. Like Exploding Corpse earlier, right? Like, you literally make one of your summons explode and it does damage to your enemies. Pretty cool in my opinion. So anyhow, let's talk about these level 7 cards. So the top of Soul Claim, you put this out, and on the next 3 monster deaths, you get to add a curse to the monster deck. Again, another curse card, which you've seen there's a lot of different ways to add curses, Boneshaper, so pretty cool there. It does generate a darkness, and on that third time that you add, the third and final time that you add a curse to the deck, you get an experience out of it as well, and it's not a burn. It's a 23 initiative, which is one of our highest initiatives right here too. So if you're looking to add some higher initiative cards to your deck, this is maybe a good choice. And the bottom is interesting. It's kind of a variant of some other cards we've seen where you get to perform a free summon. So you put this out when you know a monster is going to die that round. When that monster dies, you get to do that free summon from your discard pile. So pull out one of your Shambling Skeleton cards, put it out for free, and it reduces the damage by 2, so you take 0 damage to put that skeleton out. The other interesting element to this one, and this is where I talked about thematic stuff a minute ago, in this case, the enemy that dies turns into your skeleton, because what happens is you place it as if you were occupying the hex where that monster died. So you can get this one right into the middle of the fray potentially if you use the bottom of this card. Pretty cool overall. Okay, our other option here, Recycled Limbs. This is a big, interesting burn card. So the first thing you can do, you can see at the very top. And so if you're going to be playing this big loss card, this top, you definitely want to do the first thing on here. So you get to burn Earth and Darkness. And if you can do that, then you can do one of those, perform a free summon from your discard pile action. So get a skeleton out first, and then you get to grant all of your summons a move +0, attack +1. That can be solid if you have a bunch of skeletons out and you just pulled out another one. And there's even a scenario where if you have the last card, that Rotting Multitudes card, where you get to summon 2 skeletons with it, you could potentially do that and get an additional 2 skeletons and have all of them move and attack right away. Sort of like an undead blitz action. So that's pretty cool. It is a burn though, but you get 2 experience, so it could be worth it. Especially like a final boss, that would be pretty epic. I think that could be pretty fun. The bottom of this card, which I guess you would use often if you take this card, just because you're going to want to save that burn for the right situation. You play this card out, and on the next 3 figure deaths. So figure means a monster, a summon, an ally, any of those things, any of them who die, you get to perform a heal 2, range 3. And again, it's only targeting an ally like some of your other heals, so you can't use it on yourself, but you can use it on your summons or your party members or whatnot. And the third time you do that, you do also gain an experience. Now, as far as which card I would go with here, this is tricky. I have not gotten to level 7 yet, so I have not actually made this choice. But I think that as the big bad summon, I would probably go with Soul Claim, just because I do want that higher initiative with that class. I want to have my big bad summon move earlier in a lot of cases and do some damage. Again, maybe take something off the board. And I do like the top of that for just adding some free curses to the deck for a little bit. I don't know if I really use the bottom action, but I potentially could, because like I said before, I do sometimes use the skeletons even with the big bad summon build. So I think I'd probably go with Soul Claim for that. As far as with any sort of skeleton army build, I think you probably go with Recycled Limbs, just for that potentially epic top action. And the bottom healing action is also really good if you have a bunch of skeletons, because being able to throw out some free heal 2s can be really beneficial to your skeletons that have 3 or maybe 4 health. So your level 8 card's a little weird in my opinion. We'll start with Wailing from the Beyond here. This is an attack 2, range 4, target 3. You can burn Darkness to add Muddle to it. So, it's an attack 2 on 3 different enemies within range 4, which I've talked about your attack modifier deck being pretty good. So this is decent, but for a level 8 card, I just feel like I want a little bit more than that. The other additional effect here is that all enemies that are adjacent to at least one of your summons gain a curse. So this is another Curse Factory card that you can potentially use if you're doing that curse build. It's a 73 initiative, which doesn't help you in any way. It's not late enough to be great. It's not early enough either. The bottom here is a move 3, and then you get to do a heal 3, a range 3 for 1 ally. So I could see taking this for the big bad summon, because you have to get in there. If you can burn Earth on that bottom action, you also get to give him a ward. So that's another additional bonus for if you're trying to keep a big bad summon alive. But still, I don't know if I'd take this one, because the other card seems like so much more fun. Endless Numbers. So this is a rolling ball of skeletons summon, which is pretty cool. So it is a lost summon. It's a big summon. It has 7 health. It moves 3 and attacks for 3. Doesn't have any additional effects there, but there's an interesting mechanic with this. So your shambling skeletons can end their move on this actual other summon. So it can end their move on the summon, and if it does, they basically get absorbed into the bone horde. And if they do that, it adds a token to the card. So tokens do two different things. Each token on the card adds +1 to its attack. Now these tokens max out at 5, so that's potentially additional 5 attack for this thing. That's an attack 8 that it could do repeatedly if you can just keep it alive. The other use for the tokens is if you take damage with the Bone Horde, you can sacrifice one of those tokens in order to negate the damage. So that's a way better way than burning a card, right? If you want to keep this thing alive for a long time, sacrifice one of those tokens, get another skeleton out and try to get it on there to get it back up to its original power. But even with like 3 tokens on it, this is pretty solid. It's a 7 health with an attack 6. That's pretty good. I definitely like the top of this card. It does generate 2 experience, of course, since it's a lost summon. It's an 86 initiative, which is pretty typical for a summon very late, which is what you want. As far as the bottom, this is potentially useful too, but like in other situations where you have a lost summon on the top, you just don't end up using those bottoms very often. You're usually wanting to get this big summon out there on the board. If you do not, though, it does get to grant one of your summons a move +0, just a move. But you could couple this with some of your other cards that grant your summons just an attack on the top. So you could grant them a move with this and then grant them attack from the top on another card and put those 2 things together, which can be nice. And if you're able to burn darkness, then your summon gets to wound all enemies after that movement within range 1. So if you can move them right into a crowd and wound everybody, that could be pretty cool. So what would I go with? I think in both cases I go with the endless numbers, the Bone Horde. That's just a lot more fun to me. I mean, there's some benefits of the other card I could see going with that, and you know, I don't really know until I get there, to be honest. If I get to level 8 with this character, but that Bone Horde just seems like too much fun to not take, if you ask me. Now here we are, level 9. These are cards that you might never see, depending on the outcome of your character and your retirement goals and all that. I still have not seen a level 9 card in any of the characters I've played. I think there's a chance I could get there with the Boneshaper, though, just because my particular retirement quest is going to take a little bit. There's some calendar locked events that I have to do in order to get through it, so we'll see. Maybe I'll get there. First card here, Behold the Shrouded Sun. 10 initiative. Are you kidding me? A 10 initiative for a Boneshaper. That right away makes me want to take it with the Big Bad Summon build. I've already mentioned that early initiatives can be really good with that build because you want him going out there raining devastation. It does also, this top here, the next enemy that kills one of your summons receives Bane, which is pretty cool, but you don't want your Big Bad Summon to die. So, you know, I don't know. But like I said before, I do still use Shambling Skeletons and other, you know, lower level summons occasionally, so maybe that top could be useful in some cases. It's definitely nice to give an enemy Bane, especially if it's an enemy that like has a high shield value or something. Maybe you want to get a skeleton right up next to him on purpose and use this card, you know, something like that. It also generates darkness, which is good, always beneficial for you. The bottom half, you take 2 damage, and then you get to all enemies within range 5 take 1 damage from that. So you take 2 damage. If there's 3, 4, 5 enemies within range 5 of you, which 5 is a pretty healthy range, you could dish out a lot of damage for just taking 2 damage yourself. The other thing here is if you burn earth and darkness, you get to add 1 damage to that attack. So that makes it 2 damage to all those enemies. That could be quite a lot. And it's not a burn like that either. So although the actual effects on this card are not hugely useful for my Big Bad Summon perspective, I do still think that like the initiative and the things that it does do probably works well with that build. On the other side here, we have Unholy Prowess, which you might look at it and say, well, that's a Big Bad Summon. Why don't you take that card? And yeah, that's true. He does have 6 health. He has 3 move, 3 attack, and attacks from range of 3, which that's the key thing with this guy. He doesn't have as much health as some of your other summons, but he does attack 3 at range, which is pretty hot. And all Shambling Skeletons get an additional health when you have this card out. So that's why, you know, it has some extra benefits, but the extra benefits are really for if you're doing a skeleton army build. And with the big bad summon build, I kind of already have enough big summons to deal with. So that's why I would probably take Behold the Shrouded Sun for that character. But if I'm doing skeleton army, I'm definitely taking this skeleton sorcerer guy, just because of that added health for all my shambling skeletons, which now have, what does that put them up to, 5 health if you also have solid bones. That's pretty good. And another effect on the card is whenever one of your summons kills an enemy with a ranged attack, you get to generate either dark or earth. So thankfully, this card does a ranged attack, because your only other ranged attacker is the Wraith all the way back at level 1. And it's doing an attack 1, you know, the entire time. So this is the one that's actually going to generate that effect and make that happen. As it is a lost summon top, you do get 2 experience for it. It's a 97 initiative, which works very well with lost summon cards. Now, the bottom, I would almost say that as a build for a skeleton army build, I would prefer this card for the bottom, because you get to ignore all the take damage effects on your cards when you play out this bottom. And that's for the entire scenario. It also generates darkness and earth, and gives you an experience. So think about that Rotting Multitudes way back when, which for 6 health you pull out 2 shambling skeletons. What if you could pull out all your shambling skeletons for free? And that's not the only thing that you can take health to do. There's also a heal that you take health to do. There's other things that you can take health to accomplish. All those things get negated with this card. So that's a pretty strong bottom. I think I would be conflicted about which side of this card I'd want to use as a skeleton army build, because the sorcerer is pretty cool. It gives all your shambling skeletons extra health, and it also is going to do a ton of damage itself. But that bottom, play that first at the very beginning of the scenario, and then put out 2 shambling skeletons without taking any health. Like, I don't know if I could pass that up as a skeleton army build, and I think I'd have to go with that and use that bottom basically all the time. Okay, let's talk about masteries here. This first one is really difficult. You're going to have to be high level to even attempt it, I really think. You have to be able to summon 15 creatures, first of all, and even that alone can be tough to do in the early levels. I mean, you're going to summon quite a bit, especially with your disposable summons, but getting 15 of them out in a scenario, that's a lot. It helps more as you level up more, and you can get more and more of those shambling skeletons available to you, but it's still going to be something difficult to do. The other important thing that makes this difficult is you have to kill those summons. You can't just dismiss them. You can't just walk them into traps where they die. It doesn't count if they get killed by an enemy. You specifically have to use cards that say kill the summon in some way. There are perks that also do that, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But for example, if you remember back to our level 8 cards with that rolling bone thing, the bone horde, right? If you have a shambling skeleton end their turn on that summon, you kill that summon. So that would count towards this. So if you're working on that big rolling ball of doom, this might be a little bit easier to get to. But again, you have to get to level 8 to even really consider this, in my opinion. Now, the other mastery, with my big bad summon build, I got this in my second scenario, and I've probably gotten it 4 or 5 times since then. Playing that big bad summon build is all about keeping your summon alive, and you're almost always putting it out in the first round of any scenario. So I could probably do this mastery repeatedly. It's just a matter of making sure that they get kill credit, which isn't always easy, but the bigger summons do have that attack 3 or attack 3 with wound, although if they die from wound, that doesn't count for this. They have to actually kill it. But it's a lot easier to do than this other one, especially if you're playing that big bad summon build. Like I said, I got it in my second scenario, so that's pretty good. Okay, let's move on to talking about perks. I mentioned a couple times earlier that you get a really strong attack modifier deck with Boneshaper if you play your cards right and pick the right perks. I really love all the top half perks on this character sheet that are available to you. I love the way you can thin out, take away almost all of your negatives. At this point, I've taken all of those top perks, and the only negatives I have in my deck at this point are 1/-1 and my natural miss. everything else in my deck, at the beginning at least, is a positive outcome. Well, either a +0 or a plus something else. I barely ever have to worry about, oh, my skeleton that's only doing 2 damage just pulled the -2. I don't have a -2 in my deck anymore. That being said, the very first perk that I took and I would recommend taking is to ignore scenario effects and add 2 +1 cards to your attack modifier deck. I love the ignore scenario effects in Frosthaven because they give you additional things that you can also do. If I remember back to Gloomhaven, you had things that allowed you to ignore scenario effects, but that was it. That was all you got for that perk. And I was always like kind of iffy on doing that. But here, whenever it's like you get to ignore scenario effects and it gives you some additional bonus, I'm definitely interested in these, and I take these if they're available right away with any of my characters. Now, before we move on to the other very specific perks that will improve your modifier deck, let's talk about all the special perks for the Boneshaper. The first one here is immediately before any of your rest, you may kill all of your summons to bless yourself. Now this will factor into that mastery because you could do that anytime you rest. You can go, well, I'll just kill a shambling skeleton, and it does also give me a bless into my attack modifier deck. So you're getting 2/4 there. You know, you're getting 2 benefits out of that, which is good. This other one sounds interesting, but the way that I'm always having to be low health, I'm reluctant to take this kind of thing. So basically here, once each scenario, when any character would take damage that would actually reduce them down to 0, you can suffer 2 damage to reduce them down to 1. So basically put them on the brink of death, but save them from actually having to burn cards or anything like that. But you, of course, have to take 2 damage to do that. I can definitely see the usefulness of this. And honestly, you know, I'm getting far enough in my perks that I may have to take this one at some point. And I could definitely see it happening, but I'm reluctant to be taking additional health as the Boneshaper the way that it plays already. And the last special perk here is a 2 perk, a double perk sort of situation. We have to spend 2 perks to get this one. And here at the start of any scenario, you can play a level 1 summon card from your hand. So that's pretty interesting because then, you know, if you're doing the skeleton army build or whatever, you can get out one of your skeletons right away. So he's actually acting on the first turn, where in most cases you use that first turn to summon your first creature for you. But in this case, with this perk, you get them out before the scenario even starts. And I think that if I were playing this single summon build, I think I might definitely focus on taking this one, just because I'd like to have one of those out early and make sure that they're able to act. With the big bad summon, I guess I could use it there too, but I don't know. It's not that appealing to me because it costs you 2 perks to get, and I don't think the benefits really outweigh the detriments from having to do that. So basically what I did is I took that first ignore scenario effects perk, and after that I went heavy into all the attack modifier modifying perks at the top. I think the first one I took was to replace one -2 card with one +0 card, because a -2, when you have a summon that's doing an attack of 3 or maybe an attack of 2, is horrendous to pull, and I hated pulling that, and I wanted to get rid of that as soon as possible. So I took that one first. After that, I did the top 2 perks, all 4 of those, all in a row, where you're removing one -1 card. In one case, you get to add a +0 curse card. In another case, you get to add a +0 poison card. Both definitely useful. You know, you're getting rid of those negatives. And when you have such low attacks, you need to get rid of those negatives. Now, the last modifier deck sort of manipulation thing is where you remove a +0 card, but replace it with a +1 card. But it's a special +1 card where you can choose to kill the attacking summon and make it a +4. So this is not compatible with Big Bad Summon, so I'm probably not going to take it. I could, because you're still turning a +0 into a +1, and it's not like it costs extra perks to do that. And there may be situations where I draw it with one of my skeletons and I could still use it, so I could see myself getting it. It's just not a priority. If I was doing the skeleton army build, this would be a priority perk for me for sure. The next 2 perks, I have taken all of these so far. I definitely like these. The first perk here is you get to add 3 +1 heal your Boneshaper rolling modifier card to your deck. So I now have 9 of those in my deck. And I don't mind rolling modifiers at all in Frosthaven. First of all, because of the way that they changed how advantage and disadvantage work with rolling modifiers. It works in a way better way now. Make sure that you check that out in the rulebook and make sure you're doing it right. The other reason is that your attack modifier deck is so clean at this point that I don't mind rolling modifiers at all either. If I roll into, It's not like the old days where you could easily roll into a miss and be like, oh, too bad. You know, it's harder to do that because I have fewer negative cards. And then the other one, just adding a +2 card, which also lets you generate earth or darkness. Very, very good again. I really like all the attack modifier cards that are available to you with these perks. And I really like the way the perks make your deck. I just love my attack modifier deck at this point because I only have that -1 and a miss, and that's the only thing that I have to worry about. Obviously you get cursed and other things that will also impact that, but overall I'm really pleased, and I don't worry about turning over attack modifier cards anymore. The last topic I want to talk about before we wrap this up is items. So items for the Boneshaper are really weird. The fact is, all of your damage comes through your summons, and all the interaction and combat mostly comes from your summon. So a lot of the items out there really don't do anything for you. For instance, any sort of armor is not going to do anything for you unless you're in a weird situation where you're actually getting attacked. I mean, your summoner does occasionally get attacked. It does happen, but not to the point where it's worth using that armor slot for that. Now, the good thing is it gives you recommended items for all the starter classes, and it recommends that you start with Warden's Robes for the Boneshaper, which makes a lot of sense, and that shows you what items you want to have. There are very specific items in the game that are basically made for summoning classes, and particularly the Boneshaper. With the Warden's Robes, if your summon takes damage from attack, you can use it to give them some shield to help alleviate some of the damage, so it definitely makes sense. And there are other items, I'm not going to spoil it, but there are other items in the game as you progress that will be beneficial to a summoning class, but a lot of them just aren't. There are things like the Amulet of Life, where you can just give yourself a 1 health every once in a while. That can be good with the Boneshaper since you're spending health all the time. And of course, some potions can be beneficial, like stamina potions, for instance. Healing potions can be useful, but they're just not all that important. I really don't worry as much about my items with the Boneshaper because I'm just so focused on my summons and doing what's best for them, and it makes it easy to pick which items I want to take. But again, look out for the ones that are specifically made for the summoner, and when they do become available, definitely pick them up. We've gone over all the cards, all the details, items, masteries, perks, all that stuff. There's one more thing we still have to cover though. Is this class any fun? I would first say absolutely yes. That would be my answer to that question. I'm enjoying this class a lot. I think it helps I had prosperity to start at level 2, so I didn't have to go through level 1. I could start that big summon build right away, which is what I gravitated towards. I'm really enjoying playing that particular build of this class, and I'm even interested in potentially playing it again to try some of the skeleton army stuff, because I think that could be fun. But I also want to add here that I've played 3 classes to this point in Frosthaven, and I've honestly had fun with all of them. I started with the Banner Spear, which was a little bit of a slog through the first 2 or 3 levels, but then really started to get more fun as time went on. I also played the Locked Meteor class, and that was a blast right out of the gate. And the same can be said for the Boneshaper. I've liked this from the very beginning. I've really enjoyed my time with it. So let's also bring up that old fun poll from Board Game Geek that we shared in our Banner Spear video and look to see where Boneshaper comes out in that particular poll. And you can see here that over 40% of the people polled said that they thought the Boneshaper was more fun than average. And I would totally agree with that. I've enjoyed my time with the class. I've enjoyed the combination of the poisons and the heals and the curses and the different things that you get to do as a Boneshaper. It plays very differently from the other 2 classes that I've played thus far, and I think that's a refreshing bit of the way that the characters work so far in Frosthaven. Every one of these characters is really distinct and different. I've really not seen a character that's just like, oh, this is just a slight reimagining of another character. No, they're all very different and play very differently, and I certainly appreciate that. And if you made it this far, I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Hopefully I earned your like or your subscription or whatnot. Do the things if you want to do the things. Thanks for sticking around, and look for my next video soon.